What's up, guys? It's Fate. So I've got another audiobook for you. We're not, in fact, checking out 1999 Hidden Talents today. I emailed David Lubar, the author of Hidden Talents, after looking very thoroughly for the audiobook just to get confirmation, and David Lubar actually emailed me back and confirmed my suspicion that an audiobook does not exist for it. So I just had to go on to the next one in my list here, which is Metro 2033, suggested by my friend Wolfie. Thank you so much, Wolfie. It's always a pleasure. Now, 2033 is by Dmitry Glukovsky, a Russian author who is a really interesting individual. I was just doing a bit of reading on him. I hope he's okay, frankly. And his perspective, having grown up, born and raised in Moscow, learning about the metro system there, learning about, of course, his nation's history, and having a particular and interesting personal and familial background, there's a lot of that you can feel bleeding over into Metro 2033. And it was a phenomenal book. Now, our narrator for today, I'm going to go ahead and just say was phenomenal as well. That's Rupert Degas. He is an author, or not an author exactly. He is an actor and a voice artist, if you will, a voice actor that also performs in other facets and fields. A very fun individual to read up on, and he is absolutely an accomplished narrator. Rupert has narrated over 300 audiobooks. Absolutely no small feat. In fact, he can be found offering some really great alternate narrations for books like Name of the Wind, which is one of my all-time favorites. So I'm probably going to end up featuring Rupert again someday, somewhere down the road. Now, this narration was a ton of fun. I have some notes here. Tried to do a good job with this because everything's better with some notes. Rupert offered an incredible degree of modulation and emphasis. And I know for a fact that Rupert has been quoted as saying something to the effect of, "I do accents, it's part of what I do," something to that effect. He trained under Robert Rietti, who is a famous actor himself, also a very accomplished voice actor. So we got great things to say about Rupert here. The accents in this book are primarily, of course, Rupert's own British accent as the base narration and narration used for a handful of the characters' own voices, as well as various, you would say, Slavic and Eastern European accents that are present throughout the book. And what was remarkable, truly remarkable, was how consistent these were. These accents were consistent in their degree of variation and, if you would say, thickness. That's definitely where they're consistent as well. Some of the characters have a remarkably thick Russian accent. Others have accents that you would perhaps call more Germanic or East European, or somewhere in the midst of those two sort of families of accents. And all of them are very believable, very charming, and of course very menacing and truly compelling. Rupert's narration adds to the ambiance and the sort of atmosphere and the mood within this book. He is also not afraid to step into the realm of almost human voice acting, because in Metro 2033, that is an element of what we have going on in this book. We have strange creatures that are absolutely not human, but can imitate human speech. And I'm looking at a picture of Rupert right now that is most absolutely silly. But thinking about the voices that I just heard over the last several hours, about 20 hours, I was horrified at some points in this book. I was just going for a walk. It wasn't even dark out, and I felt so tense and like I needed to just get inside into a brightly lit room somewhere. And it would not have hit anywhere close to as hard without Rupert's insane voice acting and narration. In fact, I wanted to touch on a character that fans of Metro, the video game or the book, will be familiar with. There is a character called Bourbon. His voice is distinctly described as so unusual and inconsistent that it makes Artyom extremely unsure of what to expect from him, what to think of him, and how much to trust him. And I don't know where Rupert came up with the idea for how exactly to voice act Bourbon, but it made me so uncomfortable. It was so consistently twisted and strange while being a completely believable human voice and consistently performed accent. I mean, it just took my breath away at times. I wanted to express that at a couple points in time, the story has to just roll on with fairly large degrees of detail, fairly large passages of exposition, explanation of how events are occurring and what the characters are seeing or experiencing within an area. And for very brief moments, I was able to get distracted while more or less trying to give the book full attention. And that could have been just partly a listener's fatigue type of deal, or it could have had something to do with the repetition and the cadence with which Rupert narrates prose rather than dialogue itself. That said, the base narration and voice acting are so intensely different that it is almost hard to believe that it is all one gentleman voice acting this entire book. And for what it's worth, that's a really impressive thing to pull off. So kind of hats off there. A worthwhile piece of elaboration here is you can count on one hand, one 5-fingered hand for you Metro fans, how many female characters actually get dialogue in this book. The female voices are just okay. They don't seem to have as much investment put into them by Rupert. And Rupert has a really good grasp of masculine voices. He does this amazing job of all these different male characters. But the female voices that are featured, that are voice acted throughout this narration, are a bit weak. They're perhaps not as full of personality because they don't have as much time to develop personality. I would say one character that shows up toward the very end of the book is particularly disturbing and soulfully voice acted. It was something I could definitely appreciate. But that's me trying really hard to nitpick this narration. All in all, I don't even know if other narrations do exist for Metro 2033, but I would just say, please go ahead and check this one out. This was nothing shy of a treat. The quality, consistency, modulation, and creativity are insane. And I'm very pleased with everything I got out of this wonderful audiobook. If I were to rank this narration, it has to get an S. There were so few flaws for me to grab onto. I understand that all of this is extremely opinionated and will come down to personal bias to create the foundation for a lot of my judgment of the narration. And I was able to find people who said that they couldn't get through the audiobook because they did not like the narration. It's interesting. I, for one, thought it was wonderful. I thought the modulation and clarity and consistency were the great foundation that was just built on by adding all of his own creativity and charm. I would give it an S. at the very lowest, I would give it the highest A you can get. So, great job to Rupert in his narration of Metro 2033. Talking about the text itself, we've got quite a walloper here. I mean, this is a very dark book. It's very post-apocalyptic. In many cases, punches are not being pulled. Knights in shining armor don't come to save the day in every conflict. Many instances occur where men, women, children, all ages, all types are brutally murdered, die inexplicably, are harmed. There is no shortage of violence and human atrocity. I mean, I'm not big on sprinkling a bajillion content warnings into anything having to do with any piece of media, but not to mention Nazis and atrocious death and killings. We even dip into implied child prostitution and indoctrination, cult shit, all sorts of just vile, lowest of the low, human filth type of behavior. It's a very realistic and understandable portrayal of humankind pushed to its limits, stretched thin, and traumatized as a species, as a whole. Not to mention isolated and forced to adopt incredibly ruthless survival methods. I even have it here in my notes that so many scenes in this book serve just to establish this rampant depravity, this sort of unspeakably horrible, normalized terror, normalized brutality and heartlessness. And yet so many scenes also serve to remind you of the sort of continuum of human existence within this metro. There's a scene where people who have gone completely primitivist and are extremely hostile and regressive are effectively juxtaposed with a bustling and safe and bright, secure trade center. And this was all after the vast majority of exposition and world building of the metro had been accomplished, at least in terms of what the book seems to be setting out to do. Artyom is an extremely believable character. He is full of moral character flaws. It is clear that he is just a kid that has a vague affiliation with paramilitary activity due to his upbringing and his background having spent most of his life in this metro environment. They don't really establish moral strengths for him in the first place, and so we get a very believable, mostly morally gray, blossoming, coming-of-age, young adult type of character. It makes him extremely admirable because the author, Dmitry Glukovsky, takes the time to put you through the thoughts that Artyom is experiencing, the feelings that he has, and his own coming to a moral process and making the decisions that he makes. At various times, there are characters that are testing or seeming to act to elicit a reaction, all in the direction of Artyom, whether it's stated explicitly or somewhat implied. And gradually, you come to see Artyom being tested morally and tested for his strengths. And occasionally, you see the flaws in the character. And it's not unbelievable. It's all extremely within the realm of believability for the character. So he was extremely enjoyable to experience this story through. If you're a fan of philosophy, this book does something I really enjoy, which is touching on a somewhat unchallenged or yet to be challenged individual being confronted with a variety of philosophical ideologies in the face of this calamity, this absolute destruction of the world that once was, and this adoption of a new reality and a new lens through which to view humanity and humankind. I even have notes in here that are completely for me, just because I like the idea of going back and looking at the philosophizing of the characters Khan, Hunter, Mikhail Porfirovich, and Sergei Andreevich. It's a very interesting variety of philosophical schools, ideas of theology, religion, reality, substance, and so on. In light of an era-defining, world-changing event, creating characters that exposit this big philosophical take on the significance, the meaning, and the purpose of all the events is very fun and almost more significant to me than just building the world and expressing the details of the world. This does more to add a psychological human element to it that is really fun and lays down a lot of food for thought as you take in the world that the author is also attempting to build and express to you. I will say the ending really caught me off guard in a way. I thought I understood where everything was going. I thought I was being prepped for one of three somewhat predictable kinds of endings, but details are thrown in toward the very end that really elucidate a lot of remarkable and tragic explanation for so much of what may have been going on throughout the novel. It's almost brilliant in that it adds a lot of context through which you will want to reread the book. And shouts out to any author that can do that without it seeming like a cheap sort of trick or a gimmick that was being ham-fisted and just bluntly laid down throughout the entire book. I appreciated it. I would absolutely recommend checking out Metro 2033. While there are 2034 and 2035, two sequel books and even novelizations of the video games that are not based directly on the books, from what I understand, I do think you can get away with just reading Metro 2033. Perhaps you would find it an unfulfilling way to end your experience of taking in this very interesting story, but I'm plenty happy and plenty content giving myself some time to digest 2033 and potentially give myself a little bit of a break, a chance to check out something a bit more grounded in reality or perhaps something more lighthearted before I dive back into such a gritty world. Which I should mention brings me back to another important note. I have another book already lined up for me to check out. My friend Les Lycan has suggested to me to check out I'm Glad My Mom Died by Jeanette McCurdy. This is a very interesting book that I've heard several people sing praises of for various different reasons, and I'm just so curious. In fact, the narrator, if I'm to understand everything correctly, should be Jeanette McCurdy herself, which will make it very interesting to review. Don't know how critical I'll even want to get, but I'll try. Well, thanks everyone. This has been a real pleasure. Thanks again, Wolfie, for suggesting this book, and thanks to all of you for listening and enjoying it with me. Hope you check it out. Shouts out again to Rupert Degas and Dmitry Gluchovsky for making this wonderful production. I really hope Dmitry is okay. All right. Have a great day, everyone. Bye-bye.